Essays 15 through 21 of It's a Good Old World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephen Escalera. It's a Good Old World by Bruce Barton. Essay number 15. Are you industrious or merely busy? I presume the stage is partly responsible for it. Or perhaps the earnest young novelists who live in small towns and write novels about American business. Anyway, someone or something has given us a portrait of the successful American businessman that is unlike any successful American businessman whom I have ever happened to meet. Our portrait represents him as snapping orders through a telephone while he munches his breakfast, stopping his automobile halfway downtown to get off a couple of telegrams, rushing through a breathless day at the office, and dictating letters in his limousine all the way home. As a matter of fact, nothing has impressed me as more characteristic of really big men than a certain suggestion of leisure, a kind of elevation above the little maelstrom of detail in which the average man is caught up and whirled through the day. He does big business without appearing too busy. You know from the record of his achievements that he must get through an enormous amount of work in a day. Yet there seems to be nothing on his mind when you meet him but the subject you have come to discuss. And he apparently has all the time that is needed to discuss it. I talked one day with President Wilson. His desk was piled with commissions and bills waiting to be signed. It was a time of great perplexity in foreign relations. I had rather expected to be warned by his secretary that I must leave in 10 minutes, and to have those 10 minutes frequently interrupted. But the president talked for 40 minutes. He pushed back from his desk and spoke of this thing and that, with no evidence of preoccupation, no more sign of being rushed or ridden by his job than as if we were out fishing together, with the whole day before us. Lincoln, of course, is the supreme example of the really great man's ability to carry his burden easily, with no suggestion of desperate haste. The members of his cabinet never grew fully reconciled to his habit of stopping on his way to cabinet meetings to play a moment with Tad and his goat. They were so terribly busy themselves they could not understand a man who could carry a greater load and yet have plenty of time to be friendly and good-natured and sympathetic. Extreme busyness is a symptom of deficient vitality, says Stevenson, while a faculty for idleness implies a catholic appetite and a strong sense of personal identity. There are dead alive hackneyed people about who are scarcely conscious of living except in the exercise of some conventional occupation. Bring those fellows into the country, or set them aboard ship, and you will see how they pine for their desk or their study. They cannot be idle. Their nature is not generous enough, and they pass in a sort of coma those hours which are not dedicated to furious toiling in the gold mill. When they do not require to go to the office, they are not hungry and have no mind to drink. The whole breathing world is a blank to them. This does not appear to me as being success in life. Life is a good deal like a journey on a train. Most of us go through with it huddled in the same seat, our noses buried in our work. And once in a while we glance up rather enviously at the big, genial-looking man across the aisle. He, too, works. But every time the train stops to change engines, he seems to find time to get out for a little stroll on the platform. His work has not prevented him from having some fun with his kid, and learning a good deal about the country through which he is passing, and making some good friends on the trip. We ask who he is and learn that he's a captain of industry. It is an appropriate title. He captains his industry, commands it. It does not command him. He organizes it and fits it into its proper place in his scheme of life. He does not let it interfere with the important business of being sometimes idle. He has learned to be effective and still unhurried, to be industrious without being busy. End of essay number 15. Essay number 16. If you are not too careful, who gets the credit? Yesterday a man traveled 2 miles out of his way and wasted 2 hours of his time in order to call on me and make a complaint. We had published a photograph taken by him and had failed to put his name as the photographer in little type underneath. It was our mistake, and I told him I was sorry about it. But as he left, I thought to myself, "My dear sir, I have your measure to a quarter of an inch." And I felt like warning him to be careful in walking over the subway gratings lest he should drop through one of the cracks. For it is only little men, as I have observed, who are so tremendously concerned about the precious allotment of credit in this world. I cannot imagine Lincoln walking 2 miles out of his way to protest because his name had not been printed in little type. He formed a cabinet of men better known nationally than himself. 4 of them were sure that they were far greater than he. Seward wrote to his wife, "Only one man can save the Union, and I am the man." Stanton said to a friend who asked him what he was going to do in the cabinet, "I am going to make Abe Lincoln President of the United States." Chase from the Treasury Department conducted an open campaign for Lincoln's defeat and his own nomination to the presidency. Yet Lincoln, aware of it all, pursued his quiet way untroubled. He meant to save the Union, and if he could do it by submitting to Stanton's abuse, he would submit gladly. If he could do it by suffering some personal humiliation at the hands of McClellan and Fremont, it was a price he was glad to pay. If Seward, or Stanton, or Chase were to have the credit when the thing was done, he did not care. The important thing was to get it done, let the credit fall where it might. Have you read the story of Harriman's fight to save the Imperial Valley, as told by George Kennan? In 1907, the Colorado River overflowed its banks and threatened to destroy the valley. Though Harriman's railroads did not own any of the land in the valley, Harriman jumped in and spent $1,500,000 to stem the flood. When it became evident that another million or more would be required, he telegraphed President Roosevelt, and the president told him to go ahead, and practically assured him that Congress would reimburse him. Harriman saved the valley. Roosevelt recommended his reimbursement, but Congress never acted on the recommendation, and Harriman's roads have never to this day been reimbursed. Shortly before his death, Harriman revisited the valley and was met by a reporter. "Mr. Harriman, the government hasn't paid you that money," said the reporter, "and your work does not seem to be duly appreciated. Do you not, under the circumstances, regret having made this large expenditure?" "No," replied Mr. Harriman. "The valley was worth saving, wasn't it?" "Yes," said the reporter. "Then we have the satisfaction of knowing that we saved it, haven't we? Not much reward, you say, for the expenditure of $2 or $3 million. But it's the only kind of reward that big men really value." There is a wise old saying to this effect: a great deal of good can be done in the world if one is not too careful who gets the credit. If your object in life is to get credit, you'll probably get it, if you work hard enough. But don't be too much surprised and disappointed when some chap who just went ahead and did the thing without thinking of the credit winds up with more medals on his chest than you, with all your striving, have collected on yours. End of essay number 16. Essay number 17. The Reflections of a Grizzled Voter. I went down to the firehouse in my precinct on the first Tuesday of November and voted for woman suffrage, as has been my custom all these years. And, to my astonishment, the next morning I read in the newspaper that it had carried. I say astonishment because almost nothing that I vote for ever does carry. On the day after election I look over the papers, and if a single road commissioner or supervisor of the poor on my ticket has pulled through, I consider that it has been a successful election for me. Like truth, I have grown accustomed to being crushed to earth. It doesn't worry me as much as it used to. For, having watched many elections and listened to many campaign promises, I have noticed this, that the progress of the world isn't permanently affected very much by turning one set of politicians out and putting another set in. I continue to vote as intelligently as I can. But I have ceased to feel as enthusiastic as I used to feel about the power of votes to usher in the millennium. Maybe it's old age creeping on me. Maybe I'm just plain old-fashioned. But I just can't believe that anything is finally going to turn the trick of saving the world but simple, individual goodness. It was Napoleon, a very successful politician, who said, "Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and myself founded empires. But on what did we rest the creation of our genius? Upon sheer force. Jesus Christ alone founded his empire upon love, and at this hour millions of men will die for him. The empires, with all their machinery of election and legislation, have passed away, leaving hardly a trace behind. The carpenter held no elections. He was president of nothing, secretary of nothing. He formed no committees, made no stump speeches, cast no vote. Yet the influence of his simple goodness has outlived all the empires of the earth, and stands today the most potent force for righteousness and progress in the world. I lunched the other day with a celebrated war correspondent just back from Europe. "There's just one thing I'm sure of," he said. "Everything else about the war and the future of the world is problematic, but this I know: the world must be run by heart power after this. We've tried brain power, and it doesn't work. The Germans developed it to its highest point of efficiency, and we have the results today. It's got to be heart power from now on, or we're all in. That's all. And the home is the dynamo out of which heart power flows." There were thousands of agitators and reformers at work in the United States in the days before the Civil War. They doubtless did much good work. But all their influence added together did not equal that of this simple woman in a log cabin who gave us Abraham Lincoln, with a heart power great enough to reunite his fellow countrymen. I welcome my sisters to the ballot box. They will clog up the polling place a little more, and make me a bit later in getting down to the office on election day. But I'll forgive them all that, and I'll vote for all the reforms they think are going to do any good, so long as they will continue to give us sons like the carpenter and Lincoln. Meantime, when their pet reforms and candidates are defeated, as often they will be, let me commend them to Sam Walter Foss. Let me live in a house by the side of the road, where the race of men go by, the men who are good and the men who are bad, as good and as bad as I. I would not sit in the scorner's seat or hurl the cynic's ban. Let me live in a house by the side of the road, and be a friend to man. Reforms will come and go. Truth will keep right on being crushed and rising again. Politicians will promise and fail to make good. Movements will wax and wane. But if enough of us build our houses alongside of Sam's, we'll gradually turn this old alleyway of a world into a nice, respectable street, no matter who carries our precinct for alderman. End of essay number 17. Essay number 18. "They say" has made many a good man good for nothing. The first steamboats built in America looked like wooden boxes with pointed ends. Colonel John Stevens, their designer, concentrated his attention on his engines. One day his son Robert conceived the notion that the boats would make better time if their bows were longer and more sloping. He designed a false bow of this sort and built it onto a ship called the New Philadelphia, which slipped through the water so much more easily thereafter that it attained the great speed of 13.5 miles an hour. Robert had to build his bow almost with his own hands. He took it to his shipbuilders, Messrs. Brown and Bell, and asked them to do it for him. But Mr. Bell declined. "That bow will be called Bell's Nose," he said, "and I shall be a general laughingstock." So a man who might have played a worthy part in the development of a great industry in America lost one big chance because he was afraid of the possible ridicule of people whose opinion, one way or the other, was worthless. How many utterly drab and uninteresting people are there in the world who might have developed real personalities if they had only had courage to do and be something different from the crowd? Every single step forward in history has been taken over the bodies of empty-headed fools who giggled and snickered. Fulton, needing a paltry $1,000 to complete the building of his first steamboat, at length managed to secure it. But the friends who lent it asked that their names be withheld from the public lest it should be known that they had any connection with so foolhardy an enterprise. "As I had occasion daily to pass to and from the shipyard where my boat was in progress," he says, "I often loitered near the groups of strangers and heard various inquiries as to the object of this new vehicle. The language was uniformly that of scorn, sneer, or ridicule. The loud laugh often rose at my expense. The dry jest, the wise calculation of losses or expenditures, the dull but endless repetition of Fulton's folly. Never did a single encouraging remark, a bright hope, a warm wish cross my path. Governor DeWitt Clinton, pushing through the construction of the Erie Canal, which was so important a factor in the early upbuilding of the country, was hooted with cries of Clinton's Big Ditch and Clinton's Folly. Alaska, which has paid for itself so many hundred times over, was derisively referred to as Seward's Icebox when that courageous statesman negotiated for its purchase from Russia. Remember this if you would accomplish anything worthwhile. The crowd is generally good-natured, but its judgments are seldom the judgments of history. If you have anything really valuable to contribute to the world, it will come through the expression of your own personality, that single spark of divinity that sets you off and makes you different from every other living creature. A noted English schoolmaster used to have as his motto, "Never explain, never retract, never apologize. Get it done and let them howl." It is a motto not altogether to be commended. He who governs his life according to it will not be an agreeable companion or accomplish the largest service under a government where the will of the majority must finally prevail. But there is a rugged spirit of independence embedded in it that many men would do well to adopt. You can afford to have a decent regard for public opinion. But you can never afford to let yourself get into the pathetic condition where what they say or may say will keep you from doing what ought to be done. It's a hopeless condition to be in, because what they say today is not what they said yesterday or will say tomorrow. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, said Jesus, and ye say he hath a devil. The Son of Man is come eating and drinking, and ye say, Behold, a gluttonous man and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. End of essay number 18. Essay number 19. You have known about him all these years, but have you really known him? Since we stand upon the threshold of his birthday, let me introduce you to the most attractive, most delightful young man in the world. You have never known him as he really is. All the pictures ever drawn misrepresent him. They have made him out a weakling, a woman's features with a beard, he who for years swung an axe and drove a saw through heavy timbers, who for long days tramped the borders of his loved lake, and would not sleep indoors if he could slip away into his garden. An outdoor man he was, a man's man who could stand watch when all his friends deserted him in sleep, and could face the tempest in a little boat, calm-eyed and unafraid. They have called him a pacifist. How could they forget that day, I wonder, when in the midst of the hard-faced crowd he stood and, braiding a little whip, drove them out before him? Think you it was only the glance of righteous anger in his eye that sent them scurrying? I tell you that behind that little whip were muscles of iron made strong by many years of labor, and a spirit that never once knew fear, not even in the presence of the cross. I have met men long-faced and sorrowful, wagging their heads bitterly over the evil of the world, and by their very joylessness adding to that evil. And in their hearts they supposed that they were representing him. Think of it, representing him to whom little children flocked with joyous laughter, and men beseeching him to have dinner with them in their homes. You remember the first of his miracles, or perhaps you do not. Too often those who claim his name have preferred to forget that miracle. It does not fit in with the picture of him that they have wrought. He was at a wedding party with his mother and some friends, where the merriment ran high. In the midst of it they came to him in consternation. The wine had given out. So he performed his first miracle, just to save a hostess from embarrassment, and he thought it worth a miracle. Just to save a group of simple folk from having their hour of joy cut short, it was for such a cause, he thought, that his divine power had been entrusted to him. No one ever felt his goodness a cloud upon the company. No one ever laughed less heartily because he had joined the group. He was the gospel of joyfulness. His the message that the God of men would have them travel happily with them, as children by a father's side, not as servants shuffling behind. They killed him, of course, in the end, and sometimes I am almost glad. Glad that he died at 33, with youth still athrob in his veins, and never illusion lost or an ideal dimmed by age. Claim him, you who are young and love life, let no man dispute your claim. For he too was young and is. He too loved laughter and life. Old age and the creeds have had him too long. I offer him now to you, not in creed, but in truth, Jesus of Nazareth, the joyous companion, the young man whom young men can love. End of essay number 19. Essay number 20. Be sure you're right, and then don't do it. In Washington the other day, I called on a high official of the government whose department has come in for a great deal of praise in the last few months. I found him in his office, well and happy, and I said to him, "When I called on you 3 years ago, you had just made a move that everybody thought was absolutely indefensible. In the Senate and House, they were calling for your resignation. Various cities sent resolutions to the president demanding that a fit man be substituted in your stead. That was 3 years ago, and now you seem to be in danger of becoming a really popular character." He laughed. "One thing a man has to learn in public office," he said, "is that criticism is inevitable. The man who lets his judgment be deflected from day to day by what the people think or say will go on the rocks as sure as shooting. A man must trust his own judgment and conscience and go ahead. Some day, if he has been true, the facts will come to light and justify him." Coming back on the train, I picked up Ida Tarbell's Life of Lincoln, and read again the story of those bitter years of Civil War. In the West was Fremont, brilliant, impetuous, conceited, the popular idol. Without consultation or authority from the president, he issued in his own name an Emancipation Proclamation. It was immensely popular in the North. Newspapers and public speakers hailed it as a stroke of statesmanship, and its author as the man of vision who dared while the president weakly hesitated. The country did not know the full facts. Lincoln did. He knew that such a proclamation issued at that hour would do far greater harm than good. It would not help to save the Union, and it might throw into the arms of the Confederacy those border states which had in it their power to win the war. So he modified the proclamation. When his order was made public, says Miss Tarbell, a perfect storm of denunciation broke over the president. The whole North felt outraged. There was talk of impeaching Lincoln and replacing him with Fremont. Great newspapers criticized him, warning him to learn where he was tending. Influential men in all professions spoke bitterly of his action. "How many times," wrote James Russell Lowell, "are we to save Kentucky and lose our self-respect?" And all the time Lincoln, knowing better than any of his critics, having in his own mind his own plan for an Emancipation Proclamation, held his peace, enduring the criticism, waiting for the proper hour. Passages like that make me feel very reticent about exercising my divine right, as an American citizen, to denounce the government. So often in our history the events have proved that those who were criticized had all the facts, and the critics only part. So often men have slain the prophets, and then erected mausoleums to them afterwards. Criticism is an intelligent service in a democracy. But it is a very specialized job, and I, for one, am willing that it should be somebody else's job. Generally speaking, there is safety in this rule, and a lot of solid sense. Don't criticize until you're sure you're right. Then don't. Usually, by the time you're absolutely sure, it will be too late anyway. End of essay number 20. Essay number 21. I have always had a soft spot in my heart for Joseph. I have always had a soft spot in my heart for Joseph, the true-hearted carpenter of Nazareth. To Mary, his wife, the mother of Jesus, the world pays generous homage, and well it may. Her faith was firm at the end. She was one of those who stood brave and trusting even at the foot of the cross. The world remembers that, and generously forgets that there were times when her son was too great a mystery for her. Times when she and his brethren would have locked him up as mad, and when he spoke of them almost as though they were hardly worthy of him. We forget all this and remember her at her best, and she deserves to be remembered. But Joseph we remember hardly at all. Yet he must have been a wonderful man. "Suffer the little children to come unto me. Jesus said, holding out his tired arms, and smiling, even as his patient carpenter father had opened his arms to his own children at the close of the wearying day. Remembering such a scene as that, I stand reverently before the memory of Joseph. This is his distinction. He so represented fatherhood to his own son that the son could conceive of no more splendid title for God than the single title, Father. There is no reward of riches for successful fathers, no distinguished service medal, no Victoria Cross. We reverence Washington and Lincoln, Luther and Phillips Brooks, but the men who gave them birth and training have disappeared from our remembrance. Yet I know of no business of greater compensations than the business of successful fatherhood. Recently I was a visitor at two homes. The first was a home of abundance. We ate on rich china, and sat afterwards amid expensive surroundings. I wondered that a man who had so much should seem to find so little satisfaction in it. Late in the evening I discovered the truth. "Men call me fortunate," he said to me, "but they do not know what they say. I have made a failure of the only thing in life that counts. My son is worthless, and I let him drift into worthlessness." The other home was modest. The man who dwells in it will never be heard of beyond the limits of his own small town. But he has put humanity in his debt. The lives that he has brought into the world will shed glory on his name long after he has passed beyond. He has paid the price, of course. He might perhaps have gone farther in business, if he had been content to sacrifice everything to business. But for years he has made it a rule to take some regular time each day to be a comrade to his boys. Their reading, their sports, their problems are a first consideration on his calendar. In business he makes only his living. At home he is guiding and molding lives. "Do not be concerned at my death," murmured Samuel Wesley on his dying bed. "God will then begin to manifest himself in my family." The world has erected no monument above Samuel Wesley. He has been forgotten, as completely forgotten as though he had been a king of England or a millionaire. But the influence of his character will not perish. His is the proud heritage of the friends of Joseph, the unobtrusive, unremembered fellowship of men who lose their lives in fatherhood, and losing them, find an immortality in the undying influence of their sons. End of essay number 21.